Hello there.
What's up, Jeremy?
Not much. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, man.
Welcome everybody to a brand new show called Marks on Wrestling. Um, this is not going to be a paranormal show, although you have paranormal investigators hosting. But we wanted to do something that was different and something that we both had grown up with. So, what better thing to talk about than wrestling? Something I'm pretty sure that most of you out there have grown up with as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how it all started. We were talking about shoot, I forgot it. It was one night we were after a show or something. Me and you started talking on Messenger, and you said something about wanting to start another show. We thought about doing wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
and then we got to talking, back and forth about the wrestling. That's how kind of it got all started.
It did. It just took a little while to get here, but we're here finally.
Yeah, I had to get through the holidays and all that. So
Yeah. Yeah, and plus, with me being sick, so I couldn't do it for a while, and then you've had things going on.
yeah, I stay busy all the time.
Yeah. So, so folks, don't be afraid to ask any questions or make comments about this. Um, but tonight we're just basically going to do like an introductory type show. No specific topic except how do we get into this? So let's start with you, Don. Um, what got you into wrestling as a fan?
Uh, as far as back as I can remember, uh, I used to watch Mid South Wrestling with my grandfather on Saturdays around 12 o'clock. Uh, and, you had networks back then when you didn't have but like, 4 or 5 channels that you could pick up. You didn't have cable and all that. So uh, Saturday morning cartoons, we'd swap over to Mid South and watch Mid South Wrestling. And even if he was back there taking a nap, I'd go back there and hey, wrestling's coming on. So I'll be right there. So I mean, for years, we watched wrestling together, and then as I grew up, some of my friends and all were into it also. So we'd watch together. And of course, back then, the kids, people would say, "Oh, it's fake, it's fake, it's fake." It's like, and you'd argue with them as a kid,
Hmm.
as you grow up. And there's still people out there that oh, it's all fake. It's it's real, but it's scripted. You know, we understand that it's the outcomes sometimes are decided pre-match, but it's uh, the whole storyline and the moves and all that's exciting. You like to see different stuff in your matches and all that. So you just kind of watch it to see how things play out. Um, just like to my thinking, it would be no more than going to the movies and watching a movie. It's all scripted. You it's just another form of entertainment for us. Um, I lost. Well, as I grew up a little bit and got a little older, I got into the WWE was or WWF back at that time was really big with Hogan. I remember watching WrestleMania. I didn't watch one. I want to say three was probably the first one I remember watching. And if I recall, that's Andre, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
Hulk and I.
Hogan Andre. I remember watching that, and then of course you had the Saturday night's main event. You got the Saturday night main event on Saturdays or once a month, I think, is what it was coming on. And because back then you didn't have a pay per view every month. You had just a few a year. You had WrestleMania, you had Royal Rumble, you had SummerSlam. You didn't have them every month. And when WWF went to In Your House, it may have been before that, they started having different personalities, different gimmicks that just didn't seem as interesting to me. When they started bringing in the clowns and IRS and just some of these Tanaka. Well, Tanaka was a but the Red Rooster, Red Rooster is like, who thought of that? That's just dumb. You put a gimmick like that on a talented wrestler, Terry Taylor. Because a lot of those guys came from Mid-South, and I was used to watching those guys.
I actually saw a podcast specifically addressing the whole Red Rooster thing.
Really?
And they said that Terry Taylor back in the day was real cocky, real arrogant. And they said, okay, well, if you're going to act cocky, somehow they related that to the Rooster. And that was the whole idea behind the gimmick, because he's cocky backstage, be cocky in the ring. And so they spiked his hair up, colored it red. But Terry Taylor did not, he hated that gimmick.
Oh, I'd imagine.
Yeah, he hated that gimmick. And it certainly didn't help that they had a rooster cawing on his music theme.
Yeah. I remember getting the let's see, I remember getting Pile Driver. That was a wrestling album too. And of course I got the first one. The first one was better than the second one.
Yeah.
To me. But when they started, kind of doing that stuff, I kind of shied away from it a little bit. And we didn't get WCW where we lived because it was on cable. And where we lived, we couldn't get cable back in the day. This was before satellites and all that stuff. So I never really got to watch a lot of the WCW and the other stuff until much later. I slowly started getting back into it in the 90s. My uncle was getting into it really big, and he would rent a pay-per-view, and we would start watching wrestling together. We'd watch at one point in time when you had the Monday Night Wars and stuff, you had 2 showings of WWF back in the day before it was WWE, and you had WCW. So we would watch the first hour of WWF, swap over to WCW, and then once we finished watching that, we'd swap back over and watch the second hour of WWF. So you had 4 hours of wrestling every Monday night. And we would rent pay-per-views and sit there and watch them and enjoy them. We saw some great pay-per-views. Remember some of the bigger things that happened. Of course, the Undertaker throwing Mick Foley off the top of the cage. I just came in from somewhere. I missed part of the pay-per-view where Owen had fell. I walked in, and he had already fell, and they were just showing Jim Ross and Jerry the King Lawler on there. And it was like, what's going on? It was like, said Owen Hart fell from the top. I remember that well. Watched for a long time. Went to wrestling shows when I was younger, teenagers. I was really into CCW, which is Continental Championship Wrestling, which didn't last very long, but few characters came from there. Junkyard Dog at one point in time came through there. I got to see him. Of course, it was a house show, real small here in our town. I actually got to meet him and get his autograph. I got a 8x10 autograph here somewhere. But other names like Danny Davis, not the referee Danny Davis, but a different Nightmare Danny Davis. And then Paul Heyman actually came through there. Him and Eddie Gilbert were together.
Really?
Missy Hyatt at that time. Tom Pritchard, Dr. Tom Pritchard, who is now working in the background in WWE. He was there. He was a wrestler back in the day. I've got some old photos somewhere of all these guys ringside when we went to wrestling shows. And then you got Sid Vicious, who came through there early on. He was Lord Humongous. He had the big hockey mask like you had in Mid-South. They had a Lord Humongous in Mid-South that Jake Roberts used to fight all the time. But he was a different one. Different guy played the humongous guy. But when Sid Vicious was there, I mean, he was a huge guy. And I used to enjoy watching those matches with him because it was just devastating. Actually, I don't say I met him, but I ran into him physically. I was going to the concessions at a wrestling show, and I wasn't paying attention. I come around this corner, and I bumped into somebody, and I was like, "Oh, excuse me." And I looked up, and it's like I came up to like his stomach at that time. It was like he went, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" But
He's what, 6'9", 6'10"?
yeah, he was huge. He was tall.
Yeah, big boy.
But yeah, we had a Coco Beware. Way back in the day, I saw Mid-South. I can vaguely remember Sting was there, Warrior was there, but he was that was at Tag Team Blade Runners back in the day when they first started out.
Yep, I remember that.
DiBiase was there, Hacksaw was there, Fantastics were there.
All the big names came from Mid-South.
Yeah, I want to say Rock and Roll Express was there. Who else was there? That's the bigger names I've seen. I've seen I've seen Terry Bam Bam Gordy. I've seen him wrestle there. And man, he fought I'll say a local guy, a guy you really don't know about. I don't know whatever happened to him. Man, they tore the Coliseum up. We got a small Coliseum here, and man, they were fighting outside the ring, hitting each other with garbage cans and tables and everything else they had around the area.
Yeah, I'm looking at the roster now of who they had back in Mid-South.
Andre was even there.
All WWF, WCW guys.
Yeah, Andre was even there early on. I mean, you had a lot of talent back in the day.
Yeah.
I remember Al Perez, Dr. Death Steve Williams, him and Ted DiBiase used to tag a lot.
I remember Al Perez, and I remember thinking that if he had been utilized right, he could have been a big star. He could have been then what Seth Rollins is now. I think.
I saw him. He was one of the first ones I saw to do the belly to back. No, yeah, belly to back suplex in a pinning situation. He would bridge and pin from there.
Wow. And back then, that would have been a big move.
Yeah. Skandar Akbar was another good one back in the day. He had One Man Gang and Bam Bam Bigelow and the heels and all. Granddad used to hate that.
That's something you don't see nowadays. You don't see big boys like they were back then. Earthquake, Bam Bam. We have Otis.
Right.
I'm honestly, I can't think of another guy that's big like that. I know there's some big guys like 6 feet, 6'5", almost 7 feet tall, and they're built big, but there are no guys out there, with the exception of Otis, that are actually big men.
Large, yeah.
Yeah,
Everybody's pretty fit and everything. It's not the, hefty guys that are coming in anymore that I can see.
right. Um,
What got you started?
I got. I was flipping through the channels one morning, and I actually came across what was at the time one of the pay-per-view reports that Gene Oakland and Sean Mooney would do,
Mm-hmm.
and they were doing a report on the Royal Rumble that was coming up just in a couple of weeks, and it was for the Royal Rumble '92, and they showed a clip of the '91 Rumble, and I looked at it. I'm like, you know what? I think I want to watch this. But I don't remember anything from that particular time. But the following week, I watched WWF Superstars, and that was where their opening match. I think that was Royal Rumble weekend, actually. And their opening match was Randy Savage and Hercules.
Hercules Hernandez.
What's that?
Hercules Hernandez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Wanted to say he started out or he was at least back in the day, he was a bodyguard or something for DiBiase.
no, that was Virgil.
No, he was a bodyguard for $1 Million Man at one time. Before he was $1 Million Man. I think it might have been that back in Mid-South.
Okay.
I have to look that up to verify
I
that.
haven't watched any of Mid-South. I have heard a lot about it. By the time I got into wrestling, Mid-South was already gone. I think Mid-South turned into the UWF.
That is correct.
And I think UWF was already gone by then too. But I don't really know.
I'm trying to remember because they had a title match.
I'm looking it up.
The first UWF champion. I want to say it was Big Boss Man, but he was called something else, I think.
I remember in the NWA he was Big Bubba Rogers.
That's it, Big Bubba Rogers. He was, I believe, he was the first UWF champion. Champion. I don't remember who he wrestled. I just remember him winning. It was somebody big.
Okay, Mid-South. Huh. Well, the championships here, they're. Oh, here we go. UWF. So they had Terry Gordy, One Man Gang, then Big Bubba Rogers.
Really?
Finally, Steve Williams. He was their last champion. Yep.
Does it show who they wrestled? Who they lost? Who they beat for it?
Well, Terry Gordy was the first champion. He beat Hacksaw Jim Duggan in the tournament final.
Okay.
And then Terry Gordy lost it to One Man Gang, who then lost it to Big Bubba Rogers, and he lost it to Steve Williams, and he was the last champion. But the UWF didn't last long. It ended at the end of 1987.
Yeah, it wasn't around. Mid-South was around for a few years, and then when they turned to UWF, it seemed like it just, I don't know what happened. A lot of things could have happened. Jim Ross was there back in the heyday, back in the beginning.
I remember seeing something about Jim Ross Because I always thought he got his start in the NWA. Turns out that was not the case. Because somebody was saying that Jim Ross is the greatest announcer ever, which anybody can argue that point. And they were talking about the work that he did for WWF, and they were also talking about the work that he did for WCW. And then they started talking about other places that he was at that I had no clue of. And I think Mid-South was one of them. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, it was Mid-South back in the day.
And now he's with AEW.
Right.
Jim Ross has had a hell of a career. Not only as just an announcer, but talent scout. He was producer. He did all kinds of work. Okay, here it is. See, Mid-South, NWA, WCW, and WWF, and now AEW. But yeah, I got into it in January of '92. But I had just gotten into it, didn't really know anything about it. I don't think my mom and dad knew it yet. But after the Royal Rumble, then I started watching their Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, because they had WWF Superstars on Saturday, Wrestling Challenge on Sunday, and then Sunday afternoon, they had All American Wrestling, which is like a clip show. And then they had Primetime Wrestling on Monday nights. That was my favorite show.
Do you remember the WWE cartoon that they had?
I've seen it. That was way before I got into it. But I actually have a cassette tape.
That's about the time the action figures started coming out. The big, tall, rubberized figures.
Yep, those were before my time too. When I got into wrestling, WCW had the rubber figures, but WWF had already moved on to the plastic figures. And I had a great big box of those, and I have no idea what happened to them. I must have gotten rid of them.
They're probably worth some money right now.
Oh, no doubt. Let me see. I think I was talking with you. Yeah, it was you and Nick.
Yeah, we were talking about
picking them up, and I was like, "Yeah, I had that one," and then I got to the ones after that I never even knew existed.
Right.
I had no idea they had a giant Gonzalez action figure. Of all people, they had him. But anyway, yeah, I got into wrestling, and it just so happens that year, WrestleMania came to Indiana, and Dad took me there, and we were way up in the nosebleeds.
Really? Which one was that?
WrestleMania 8.
8?
Yeah, that's the one where it was Hogan and Sid Justice, Ric Flair, Savage, Bret Hart, Roddy Piper. Yeah, it was there, and the wrestlers from where we were at, the wrestlers were only about that big.
Yeah.
And we had to watch it on the screen, but I didn't come out here to watch it on a screen. I wanted to watch them.
Yeah.
Luckily, my dad had the foresight to bring binoculars with him. and we'd be sitting there trading back and forth through the binoculars, watching the wrestlers. And every time that they would slam somebody, the sound would reach just about 5-10 seconds later. That's how far away we were.
I remember me and my uncle went to a WCW event held in Jackson Coliseum, and we had no seats also. And like you said, they're tiny. We took pictures, but I mean, unless you knew who they were, you couldn't see them. Little sticks in the two little blobs on the pictures. Like, oh, that's Sting there, you know. And after that, I was like, if we go to any more shows, which we went to a couple house shows, WWF shows. It was still WWF back then. Me and him went, and we would get ringsides. We'd try to get, because it wasn't really that high, then. You pay about $30-$40 for I don't think it was even that much, but you get somewhere ringside seat. And we went to a few shows. We saw Batista when they had the what was that faction they had with him and Flair and Evolution. Yeah, we saw him during the Evolution period. Batista is a huge human being.
Oh yeah.
Person. This was back before he had the big tattoo on his back. It was outlined, but it wasn't colored in yet.
Okay.
We saw them. The last show we went to, we saw, of course, Lita was there at one point in time. Trish Stratus.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of who else.
I'll tell you what, Lita was one of those. The older she got, the better she got in every way. Back then, she was athletic, but now, even with the last couple matches that she had last year, she just blew away everything what she did back then.
Right. The last show we went and saw, and we were like third or fourth row from the ring. And I'm trying to think of who went with me. Somebody went with me. My uncle may have went with us. But it's been a while. But Triple H and Undertaker were taking on two guys. I don't even remember who the heck they were. And
well, this was during the Divas time. Oh.
I was sitting there, catching partial recordings on my phone, during the match, and because we were really close. And I remember they had both guys in the ring, all four of them in the ring, and they timed it perfect. Undertaker grabbed the guy by the throat, and Triple H had the guy in the pedigree. And I'm sitting like, oh yeah, I'm sitting there fixing to watch both of them do their finishing move, and everybody stands up in front of me, blocks it, and all you hear is the sound, boom, boom. It's like, oh my God, no. Missed the whole thing.
I hate it when the people jump up in front of you like that.
Which I didn't, I should have known.
Oh yeah. Sometimes the crowd just goes wild. Well, as Gorilla Monsoon said, the crowd has gone bananas.
Yeah. Back in the day, Jesse Ventura
being on commentary.
Yeah, I remember McMahon and Ventura, Jesse Ventura, doing the commentary, for years. Back when McMahon was just he was a nice guy.
Yeah, McMahon's a funny one. He would do all the commentating on the TV shows. Almost never heard him do commentary except in the 90s. But that even then, that was only every now and then. It was mostly Gorilla in either Jesse Ventura or Bobby Heenan. Hi, Nick. And everybody have raved and raved about Gorilla and Jesse, and they were a really, really good team. But nobody, in my opinion, nobody comes close to Gorilla and Bobby Heenan. Their peak would be Royal Rumble and WrestleMania of '92.
See, I think that was probably the time I quit watching for a while.
Yeah.
Because I can remember, Jesse and McMahon. And then we started watching again.
Jim Ross was already there?
Moss was on there.
Okay. So, in my opinion, you missed out on the best time when it comes to commentary. They had some really good commentating teams since then. Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross, Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler. And then it almost seemed to be like a revolving door. You had Booker T and Bradshaw. Yeah.
I used to love the Acolytes.
Yep.
Used to love them.
I remember when Bradshaw debuted as Justin Hawk Bradshaw. He came in as a rough Texan, cowboy hat. He had the rope. I can't remember if it had I think it had a hook on it. He had the long hair, the big mustache. He was every bit like what you would expect from a Texan wrestler. Terry Funk, Stan Hansen. He looked like he fit in with those guys as opposed to what we remember him now when he was JBL and with the Acolytes. Yeah, Justin, he was a surprise. Because the way that he came in is like, well, this is going to be one of those wrestlers that won't last long. But he did as he reinvented himself. And the most successful wrestlers typically are the ones that continuously reinvented themselves.
You're right.
Jericho is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, Jericho's been around for a while.
Oh, man,
He started in WCW, I do believe. Well, I say he started. First recollection of him was in WCW.
Yep. Yeah. 95, I think it was 96 when he came out. Then, and I know that he was.
What do you have? The Lion Tamer? Was that what that was called back then?
Lionheart. Yeah. One of his moves was the Lion Tamer, and he was also the Lionheart. But Chris Jericho was one of those that reinvented himself, over and over and over, not necessarily completely changing up his persona and his look, but he was still himself, but in a different way, if that makes sense.
Right.
To me, his best gimmick, which a lot of people found it annoying at first, but then it really caught wildfire was when he had the list.
I guess I remember that.
He was with Kevin Owens,
Okay.
and he always had a clipboard. And if somebody did something stupid, your name is going on the list. And at first, it was like just a little stupid little thing, and then it just went viral. So now it's like everybody is waiting on him to add that next name to the list.
Kind of like a Go Bird, your next thing.
Sort of, but the same principle, but completely the opposite.
Right.
Whereas Goldberg, if you're next, your ass is getting kicked. With Jericho, if you're next, your ass is getting on the list.
Mhm.
Like a Santa Claus list, I guess. and I also remember a different kind of list back in his early years in WCW, where he had this thing going on with Dean Malenko. And Dean was known as the man of 1,000 holds.
Right.
So Chris Jericho came up with this thing of, well, I know 1,001 holds. And he actually had this list made out, and he would stand in the ring and start reading them off.
Really?
Yeah, and I remember that. He didn't do it all in one thing. He did it in different times, and he would be reading off the simplest things. Clothesline, headbutt, but something like doing that at the time was getting him noticed, not necessarily by the people backstage, but he was getting the attention of the fans.
Right.
Because back then, when he was in WCW, because he was a cruiserweight, the cruiserweights didn't really catch the attention, get the TV time like Hulk Hogan, Savage, because he was a small man, even though he was more talented than the bigger wrestlers.
Right. I really enjoyed, there's a couple factions that I enjoyed. In WWF back in the day, there was the Oddities. Loved watching them come out and doing their thing.
Oddities?
Yeah, the Oddities. I loved it. And they had a catchy little song with Insane Clown Posse.
Yeah.
Freak Show.
Yes. And then they would all do this thing.
Right. Right. They were really big, getting the crowd, into it.
Did you know that one of those guys was Earthquake?
Really?
Yeah. Golga. The big man with the gold mask.
On. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Earthquake.
Okay.
And
Kurgan was actually he was in 300.
Yeah, Kurgan was intimidating, especially when he was a part of the Truth Commission.
I don't remember that.
Truth Commission was just before Oddities came out. They wore green shirts, camouflage pants, and I think they were supposed to pass as Green Berets because I remember wearing those type of hats.
Right.
And there were 4 of them. Kurgan was one of them. Now I got to look this up.
While you're doing that, see another faction I enjoyed. Should have had them on my head just a second ago.
Here it is. Bull Buchanan was one of them too.
Who was?
Bull Buchanan.
Bull Buchanan.
He had just a very short amount of time there in WWF.
Name sounds familiar, but I can't picture his face.
to me, he's not one of those that really stuck out. The leader of the Truth Commission was Don Callis. He's the one that was with TNA, I think. Yeah, he was with TNA, and now he is in AEW. But Don Callis, he was the leader of the Truth Commission that had Bo Buchanan, Kurgan. Oh, they had some other guys. Oh, Mantar was in that one too.
Mantar.
Him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was in that one as well.
Another faction that I really enjoyed was Raven's Flock. You had
Those guys I couldn't get into for some reason.
You had Raven, you had Kidman. I always liked Kidman.
Saturn? Wasn't Saturn in that one too?
Perry Saturn was in that. Yes, he was. I enjoyed watching him wrestle. I enjoyed watching Kidman. He was a cruiserweight. He would do some crazy stuff.
Kidman, he had so much talent. He had one of the best talents, a great move set, but as far as the career goes, in my opinion, I think he had a poor career. Let's see here. Raven's Nest, Flock.
Raven is still wrestling, from what I understand, isn't he? Of course, he ain't got much hair.
I don't know. Van Hammer was in it. Chris Kanyon.
Chris Kanyon, I remember that.
Yeah. Scott Riggs. Oh, here's a couple names I forgot about. Somebody named Sick Boy. His real name is Scott Vick. And Lodi. Yeah, I remember Lodi. He was a crazy one then. Little guy too.
Chronic.
Tag Team Chronic?
Huh?
The Tag Team Chronic?
No, the wrestler Chronic. There was a wrestler called Chronic.
I
Want to say he was around. He may be gone now. He may be passed. But he was a real massive, big guy.
Horace Hogan was in the Flock as well.
Hogan was?
Horace Hogan?
Horace Hogan. Yeah.
Hulk Hogan's nephew.
Yeah, I remember that. I want to say Rhino might have been in that. Rhino?
He's not listed in here, no.
Okay. I know he was there around that time.
Yeah, I know that he was an ECW. He's an ECW original.
Right.
I'll tell you what, ECW, for as much as I personally am not a fan of the hardcore stuff where they try to use anything and everything as a weapon.
Right.
What they did for the time was unheard of. I think ECW paved the way for what is now CZW.
You say CCW?
ECW.
Oh, ECW.
Yeah. Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Right. You said it paved the way for what?
CZW. Combat Zone Wrestling.
Okay, I guess I'm familiar with that one.
Combat Zone is exactly what it sounds like. They took Extreme Championship Wrestling and took it to the extreme. John Moxley was there. I want to say Kevin Owens was there too, but to be a wrestler there, you have to be very crazy and you have to have extreme high pain tolerance.
There was a guy, trying to think of his name, because you're saying Kevin Owens, but there was a Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah, Kevin Sullivan, he
Was out there.
he was a different one. I never knew how to take him as a wrestler because he was a wrestler, but at the same time, he wasn't quite the wrestler that we would normally see.
Right. He puts me in mind of Perry Saturn. Puts me in mind of him for some reason.
I think they were associated at one time, possibly. But Kevin Sullivan, he was one of the main bookers for WCW. And he actually got outed by Brian Pillman at Super Brawl. They were having a respect strap match at Super Brawl '96, and they were supposed to be tied up together with a strap. But unlike most strap matches where you're supposed to drag your opponents to the four corners,
Mm-hmm.
the only way you can win is by getting the other person say, "I respect you." And Brian Pillman grabbed the microphone and said, "I respect you, Booker Man." And then he left. And that was the last time he was in WCW.
Talking about matches and all that. I wish I would have been able to watch some of the Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express matches. I remember they had a scaffold match.
Yeah, back in the day when they had them all available to rent on tape, I would get all of those. And I even taped a bunch of them. I think I had that match.
Do you?
Yeah.
I
remember
missed the heyday of WCW.
Yeah. That match, I think, was actually a Starrcade.
I think so.
Yeah, either 87 or 88. And Jim Cornette was hanging from the scaffold at the end of the match.
Really?
Yeah. And he ended up letting go and fell down to the ring. And I want to say that he fractured his leg doing that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Ricky Morton is still out there wrestling. He's
They both are, actually.
they're doing some kind of farewell rock and roll tour or something.
Yeah.
Some
Actually, they
Facebook
have just
posts
recently
and
won a
stuff.
tag title somewhere.
Yes, I still see some. I see some fake. They come up. Ricky Morton comes up on my feed on Facebook.
Rock and Roll Express. Looking it up, they had just recently won a tag title somewhere. They won the NWA tag titles a couple years ago. At their advanced age, which really, Ricky doesn't look all that old, and he's 66 now.
Right.
But Robert is 64, so he's younger, but he looks older than Ricky does. And
one of the Midnight Express just passed away not long ago.
Bobby Eaton,
Yeah, he passed away a few weeks ago.
he was somebody who I thought should have been bigger than what he was. He had so much talent, but he didn't necessarily have the charisma that the fans hold on to.
Right.
But Bobby Eaton could have been much bigger than what he was. Let's see. He was with Stan Lane. They had a third member, I think. But what I really liked about Rock and Roll Express is that the two of them knew sign language.
Really?
They would communicate to each other every now and then during their matches with sign language so that the other team wouldn't know what they're saying.
I never knew that.
Yeah, well, they mentioned something when they came to the WWF back in '93, and I remember that always stuck with me because of me being hearing impaired. About them knowing sign language.
That's pretty cool. I never knew that about him.
And I forget what it was. I want to say it was Robert Gibson. That his mother was deaf, and that's how he learned sign language. And Ricky Morton ended up learning it as well.
Well, I guess if you're traveling, around in the car together and, conversations, talking into your road trip there, probably brought that on.
Dennis Condrey, he was the other member of the Midnight Express. Thinking about these guys, it makes me think of the amount of teams that they had back in the 80s. Half of everybody's roster was tag teams.
It was tag teams were big in the 80s.
Yeah.
You had, and they were like, gimmicked together. It wasn't this guy and this guy making up a team. It was these guys or the Killer Bees or the Sheep Herders or the Hart Foundation, Samoans, Islanders.
Powers of Pain.
Powers of Pain, Road Warriors,
Demolition.
A lot of tag teams back in the day.
What was funny about the Killer Bees is that they're the only team that I know of that did this. That they were just regular wrestlers, and then at some point they'd be wearing masks, so that you could never tell one from the other.
Right. Back in Mid-South, you had Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2. They wore masks. You had the Grappler 1 and 2.
Oh, yeah, I remember that, Mr. Wrestling. Mr. Wrestling 2 was the more famous one.
Yeah, Bob the Bullet Armstrong used to wear a mask back in the day.
Yep.
You have a lot of mask play. You don't really see a whole lot of masked wrestlers anymore other than the luchadors.
Yeah.
He had Kane, but there at one point in time, he took his off.
Yeah.
But yeah, you really don't see a whole lot of masked wrestlers anymore.
Yeah.
At least here.
I think Rey Mysterio.
He might be the only one.
In WWE?
Yeah.
I know in ECW, Luchasaurus wears a mask.
Yeah, it's like I said, only your Mexican wrestlers coming over are the ones wearing masks anymore.
Yeah. And it was considered a dishonor or a disgrace if you lose your mask.
Right. I'm trying to think. There was another. I remember Mysterio getting his mask taken off in WCW.
Psychosis.
Huh?
No, not Juventud. Juventud Guerrero.
Guerrero. Yeah,
He lost
yeah,
his mask.
that may have been who I'm thinking of.
Yeah. But as far as I know, he never put his mask back on, but Ray did.
I may be thinking Juventud. The Guerreros were really good back in the day. You had Hector and the
Eddie,
Guerrero brothers. You had Hector and
Chavo.
Chavo and Hector Guerrero.
Let's see. It was one of those two. I want to say Hector, but it was one of those two that came in as Survivor Series as a gobbledygooker.
I remember the Gobbledygooker.
That was so ridiculous. I think that right there was the very start, aside from Red Rooster, was the very start of the super ridiculous gimmicks.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I was actually a fan of a lot of those bad gimmicks. I was a big fan of IRS.
You remember the Genius?
The Genius.
Yeah.
He wasn't wrestling when I got into it. He was.
That was Savage's brother.
Yeah.
If I remember right.
And one thing you got to say about Randy Savage, above all else, is he made sure his family was taken care of. When he came to WWF, he brought his brother with him. They were a package deal. Yeah, I was a fan of the Berserker, Skinner.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed the Beverly Brothers.
I guess I remember them.
The Genius actually was their manager. Beverly's were only there from 91 to 93.
Who were they? Is that Rick Martel?
No, Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos. They were known as the Destruction Crew in AWA.
Rick Martel was part of a tag team. I just can't remember what they were.
Two of them, actually. He was with Tom Zink as the Can-Am Connection. And then when Tom Zink left WWF, Rick and Tito Santana became Strike Force.
Remember that.
And that was a feud that never saw a conclusion. Because they never had that blow-off match on pay-per-view. But every time those two were in the Rumble together, they went at it. Let's see, they split up in '89, and even in the last Rumble that Tito was in, which was '93, he went right after. Martel went right after Santana.
I remember another thing. Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham were.
Oh yeah.
Was it All Americans?
The Americans.
Hogan's theme song that everybody knows now as Real American was actually their theme song.
Yeah, I know. They were the U.S. Express.
That was actually, the Real American was actually their theme song on the Wrestling Album 1.
And I think they actually used that at WrestleMania. When they wrestled at WrestleMania 1, I think they actually had that theme song for that event.
I vaguely remember the matches on there. I know it was Hogan and it was
Hogan and Mr. T.
Mr. T.
And Roddy Piper and Paul. and Paul Orndorff. Andre took on Big John Studd.
I remember that.
Rotunda and Wyndham took on Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik.
Oh, I forgot about them two. That was a good tag team.
Yeah. King Kong Bundy and his 9-second match that took 20-some seconds against SD Jones. Tito Santana opened the very first WrestleMania with the Executioner, who was actually Matt Bourne. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Who was the Executioner?
WrestleMania, talking about WrestleMania 3, it was the first one I really actually watched.
Buddy Rose. Tito Santana and Buddy Rose.
Buddy Rose?
Yeah. Playboy Buddy Rose. But he was then as the Executioner.
Okay.
I'm looking at the card right now. Brutus Beefcake and David Sammartino. I felt bad for David Sammartino because I think the WWF was trying to capitalize him on his dad's name, but he just never caught on.
I remember when Brutus he had a match with somebody and they got their hair cut. I think that's what spawned the whole the Barber Beefcake.
That was that actually wasn't Brutus's match. That was Roddy Piper and Adrian Adonis.
Yeah, Adrian Adonis got his hair cut.
Yeah.
In the ring, yeah.
And this was when I think he was still teaming with Valentine. This is at WrestleMania 3. Yeah, it was Beefcake and Valentine, and they had lost to the Rougeau brothers, and Valentine and Dino Bravo turned on Beefcake, and then the very next match was Piper and Adonis, and that's how he got the Beefcake thing.
Yeah, I remember Jake Roberts coming down or Alice Cooper coming down with Jake Roberts during that match. I was like, oh my God.
And that
because I'm a big Cooper fan.
That big snake that they had that night. Jake Roberts was one of my favorite wrestlers, but I hated the snake. I am not a snake fan.
I was a huge Jake Snake fan. Still am. He's probably my second most favorite. Undertaker is, of course, the first. But Jake Roberts. I mean, I used to love watching his matches.
The thing about Jake Roberts that stood him apart from everybody else is that he was a perfect ring psychologist.
Yeah, and the promos he would throw out there, man, some of the best promos ever.
Yeah, he was one of those guys who, even though he never raised his voice, he got your attention.
Yeah, it was just that voice and that intelligence far as in the wrestling business coming out.
And a lot of people are upset that he never got a title in the WWF. But when you really think about it, Jake, no matter what he did, was so over with the fans as a fan favorite and as a heel he was so over with the fans that he didn't need a belt.
Right.
He was one of those few wrestlers that had no use for a belt. Roddy Piper, I would say it was one of them as well. He didn't need a belt, even though he won the Intercontinental title, but he did not need a belt.
I used to watch Jake matches in Mid-South, and he would remember him DDT and Terry Taylor on a chair one time. And then there was that feud with Lord Humongous, and of course it was a different, it was a smaller Humongous, and that was when the hockey mask started coming in. He would headbutt everybody and bust him open, and then Jake Roberts started coming with a bag to the ring, and he thought it was a snake and all that or something, but he would have his own hockey mask that he'd put on, and to combat Lord Humongous. Then he was teamed up with the Barbarian, which is a different Barbarian than the one that was in WCW or WWF. And
I didn't know there was another wrestler that used that name.
yeah, and I got something that just popped up on my screen for some reason.
Uh-oh. Well. So while we wait for Donald to make his return, I hope. Let's see here. Come on, Donald. So who do we have watching us right now? And I'm going to send him a message. So anyway, while I'm waiting on Donald, so the whole purpose of this is that, oh, here we go. What happened?
There was something that popped up on my screen, another StreamYard, so I cut it off, and it took everything off.
Wow.
What were we talking about? Oh, Jake Roberts.
Oh, Jake Roberts.
Yeah, there was a partner that had a mohawk, real big guy, and he was called the Barbarian, and they tag teamed for a while. And Sir Oliver Humperdinck he was the manager for Lord Humongous, and of course he come in and Humongous come in and jumped Jake and had him bloody and all, and then the Barbarian come down there. It was right at time the show was going off. I remember him coming down and jumping in the ring and standing face to face with Lord Humongous to help Jake. I was like, oh, it's fixing to get good now. Them two are fixing to go at it. And it'd be dang if he didn't turn on Jake, and both of them were, stomping on Jake Roberts and left him bloody in the ring. And I was like, oh man, that would have been good. And then them two were going to be a tag team, but I don't think they lasted very long. I think he went up somewhere.
That was John Nord, the Barbarian. That was the Berserker.
Okay.
Funny story about him. There's a podcast, and they were talking about John Nord, the Berserker, and they said that he was super talented, but he was crazy, like legitimately crazy, and that's why they never really did much for him. And even before and after his stint as the Berserker, he always wore those fuzzy boots.
Yeah, I think he had them back then.
Yeah.
Uh, Funny story that Mid South, they were touring. This when MTV started coming out a little bit, playing videos. They would put in some music videos on the show. I remember Al Perez having one. Lord Humongous had one. They come out. They did a video shot of him wrestling in shots at a steel mill. Walk around, and it played War Machine by Kiss. And then they had Jake the Snake Roberts and the Barbarian. They played "Lay It Down" by Rat, and that song was what got me into the hair metal, into the music, in the '80s music. So I was like, man, that's a good song. And I looked it up. Now that was back when the Columbia Record Club was around. You could get 12 cassettes for a penny. And that was one of the first ones I got. That and some Alice Cooper. And yeah, that hit me into the music genre that I listen to mostly.
Trying to see here how he was able to be the Barbarian. Okay, he was Nord the Barbarian, and then the guy that we all know as the Barbarian, he was actually wrestling as Conga the Barbarian. And then he ended up dropping the Conga part.
And he was in WWF, correct?
He was back and forth with WWF and WCW. He was with the WWF. Then he went to WCW and almost immediately went to the main event level, because I remember at Halloween Havoc 92, he was wrestling Ron Simmons for the WCW title. And then he was gone in just a few months. Then he came back to the WWF, but this time he came back as Sione, which is his real name, as the head shrinker, because he took over for Samu, who left or retired. And then after that, he went back to WCW, where he was a part of the Dungeon of Doom. Remember them?
I don't think I do.
This was after Hulk Hogan came to WCW.
Okay.
And they had this whole big stable coming after Hogan. That had the Barbarian, Zeus was in it, Kevin Sullivan, some guy named the Grand Master, who I still have no idea who he was. Kamala was a part of it. Kamala was another wrestler I always enjoyed watching. Earthquake was in it as the Shark. WWF came up with some bad gimmicks. WCW came up with the worst gimmicks. Let's put it that way. Beefcake was in the Dungeon of Doom as the Zodiac. Haku was in there as Ming. Oh yeah, they had all of these guys.
Yeah, I remember Ming, Haku and Ming.
Yeah, they had all of these guys against Hogan, and this was shortly before Hogan turned heel with the NWO.
You know, I had heard that Hogan had pitched the whole heel thing back when WrestleMania 5 hit, when him and Warrior were fighting.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that too. Vince wasn't having it.
Yeah,
Which I don't blame him because Hogan was the biggest thing ever.
yeah.
You don't turn that heel. But at the same time,
I think it was just the right time, you know, for that to happen over in WCW with the
yeah,
NWO.
yeah, because at that
NWO,
he pitched it WF, that would not have gone over well.
yeah. When NWO come out, man, it went huge.
Yeah,
Um, you had the black and white, and you had two or three other factions that was NWO. You had the red, and then you had the.
that was when it became ridiculous.
Now I like the Wolfpack. I enjoyed the feud between the two, and then Conan, K-Dog, I think is what he came out. We actually got to meet him back at one of the events. We stood
Really?
around back as the wrestlers were coming out, you know, loading up their stuff and leaving. And I remember K-Dog coming over and signing this big sign we had made. I don't know whatever happened to that sign.
Did you know that Conan had one match with the WWF in '92? He came in. Oh man, what was the name of that character? It went through a couple different names before that character became Max Moon, and he was the most colorful thing ever.
More than Blue Blazer?
He was well. It wasn't Conan. It was somebody else who took over the gimmick that became Max Moon, but it was El Relapongo. It is basically he was supposed to be a wrestler from the future. That was the gimmick. He did one match, and then he was gone. Apparently, a disagreement with McMahon, and then they had the outfit, and they didn't want to see it go to waste. So a guy named Paul Diamond took over that outfit. Paul Diamond was Kato in the Orient Express. But Pat Tanaka, I believe, had already left at that point. So Paul Diamond then became the Comic Kid when he made his debut as that character. Then after 3 or 4 weeks, then he became Maximilian Moon. And then he got shortened down to Max Moon. He had a great look, a colorful look. He was very, very good in the ring, very fast, high flying. Made one pay-per-view appearance, and that was in the Rumble '93. And he barely lasted 2 minutes.
Yeah. Another memory came up with WWF had a Saturday afternoon show at one point in time.
Mania?
Huh?
Mania?
I'm not sure what it was. I remember I was over to Buddy's house and we were watching it. And of course, going back to,
Was Todd Pettengill the host of it?
I don't remember. I just remember this one match because we stopped what we were doing. It's like, hey, wrestling's on. Let's watch wrestling.
Oh,
And this goes back to the CCW days when we were watching, that stuff.
oh, Yeah.
They had a guy there called Willie B. Hurt, and what's the other guy?
Willie B. Hurt.
Yeah, his name was Willie. B was his initial, and then Hurt was his last name. And he, God, what was that other guy's name? He was a wrestler. He was a referee turned wrestler. And God, what was his name?
Referee turned wrestler.
Yeah, NCCW.
Oh, then I was going to say the only referee that became a wrestler that I know of was Danny Davis.
Yeah, that was in WWF. There was one, Tom, something in that nature. Anyway, they were coming in, and they were, fairly big players in the CCW. And then we were watching the WWF show, and we saw these two guys. They were announced. It's back in the day when you had big names fighting these kind of nobodies, your jobbers, and they were just getting the crap beat out of them. And anyway, we're sitting there watching it, and they announced them, Willie Hurt, and then the other guy, I can't remember his name, and we were laughing. I was like, oh my God, that's Willie B. Hurt and so-and-so. It's like, oh my God, I wonder who they're wrestling. And then Demolition's music come on, and we just started laughing. It's like, oh my God, they're fixing to get destroyed. And they did. It was so funny. We just died laughing when we heard the music come on. It's like, oh my God.
Demolition. They were. Oh man. Up until Legion of Doom came to the WWF, they had no equal.
No.
And the thing about Demolition is that the guy that came up with that concept, he was the original Demolition member. Then after a couple of matches, he had to stop because too many people were recognizing him, even behind that face paint, that he had to stop being Demolition and somebody else took over.
Kind of looked that match up.
So let's see. It was Randy Cawley who came up with Demolition, and Randy was one of the Moondogs, Rex. Moondog Rex.
I remember the Moondog.
That was such an unusual character, the Moondogs.
I see here Willie B. Hurt versus Private Pile. I've been looking for that match between Private Pile and Sergeant Carter. It was a thing in CCW versus Lord Humongous and Shane Douglas. When Shane just came into wrestling. He was really, he was a cruiserweight. Just look up. Look up Continental.
But yeah, the Moondogs. Oh man, they had the core Moondogs were King, Rex, Spot. That's the one I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
Spike, Cujo, and Greg Murray. He's a current member. And then they had many others: Splat, Max, Mort, Buddy, Baron, Davis, X, Moondog X, Runt. Yeah.
So they had a bunch of them. I didn't realize they had that many. I only remember the couple of them.
Well, I'm trying to figure out because the Moondogs, just by the way that they look like they were Kentucky and Tennessee hillbillies with shaggy hair, unkempt beard, and jeans. Let's see. They carried chewed up bones to the ring. I remember that. But they were never in. They were never. Oh no. Spot was. He was on. He was on a pay per view once, but that was it. Here we go.
Richard, Tommy Rich, Johnny Rich. I remember them. Dutch Mantel.
Oh man, I forgot about him.
The New Guinea Headhunters. There's Moondog
Dutch
Spot.
Mantel. He was actually Bradshaw's original manager when he first debuted in the WWF.
There it
He
is.
was
Alan. There it is. Alan Martin. Alan Martin was his name. Willie Hurt and Alan Martin versus Demolition. And Hurt is spelled Hert.
Okay. See, Dutch Mantel
Match.
was a manager in the WWF with Justin Bradshaw when he first debuted. He also managed Jack Swagger and Cesaro. And he was also the manager for the Blue Brothers.
Blues Brothers?
Huh?
Blues Brothers, you said?
Blue Brothers. BLU. They were Appalachian wrestlers, but they were Don and Ron Harris, who became Skull and 8 Ball in that faction with Crush, the bikers.
I remember the bikers.
Yeah. That was when they were doing this whole gang warfare thing in 97, 98. I was never a fan of that.
Oh, God. I'm going to have to look that up. Jake Roberts, Alan Martin.
Disciples of Apocalypse, that's what they were. Oh man, we could talk about anything and everything when it comes to wrestling.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm about to get off here pretty soon. I got to go in there and cook dinner and all.
Oh yeah, I'm ready to get off of here too. So anyway, tonight we this was impromptu because the guest that I had originally for 13th Dimension had to cancel. She has a sick child. Um, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do tonight, if I was even going to try to do a show. Then I got to thinking, hey Don, are you working?
Yeah, it was off.
So normally this show would be on every other Wednesday nights, and maybe some other nights here and there, depending on schedules. And I think we're planning on doing an after show for the Rumble, are we? I remember
What
something about that.
what days are Rumble?
That's on Saturday Saturday the 28th. Because I remember you saying something about that, and I wasn't sure if you were going to be working that day or not.
I'm off the 28th. I do work the 29th.
Okay. That'd be a late show, though.
Yeah. We could do we could do before and an after show. Depending on the well, it starts pretty early, doesn't it? Is this still on Peacock?
The kickoff show starts at 7 my time, and the show would go from 8 to 11, usually.
8 to 11.
Yeah, my time. So it'd be 7 to 10 your time. But it really all depends on when the show actually ends.
Here's a thought.
Huh?
Here's a thought. Depending on the time schedule of what you got coming on that Saturday, I could probably set it up and watch. What if we watch the show, watch the Rumble, and we're sitting there kind of commentating while we're watching?
I like that idea. I like that idea. We can do that.
That would be a good one. I'm off that day. I could set up a TV and all that in here, and we could I could watch, you could watch, and we could sit there and commentate back and forth on what's going on. I don't know about the copyright stuff. You know, if it was bleeding over, maybe.
Well, we can
Give
we
me
could
just
we could probably have the show on mute and just commentate that way.
could
Because my TV's right here.
on a podcast.
Because we don't necessarily have to. Yeah, we shouldn't. Yeah, we can't have it actually on the show.
What if we could get around the copyright part if we had a headset on, listening to the show, and it wouldn't go over the copyright stuff because you couldn't hear it on there, but we could actually talk about it.
True, but then how would we be able to hear each other?
Well, you just have it, cocked over. You can hear one ear out the other.
That might be a little difficult for me, though.
All right. We'll toss it around a little bit, and we'll talk about it and see what we can do.
I like that idea.
If we can get around the copyright part of it, where it's not bleeding over, I think it'd be a good idea. I mean, hell, they're all the time streaming the stuff on TikTok.
True. Facebook is different. Facebook just loves to ding the hell out of people. even if it's not a copywritten thing.
Yeah.
We had a show a few weeks ago where they had about 20 seconds of silence, nothing, and they got a copyright ding from soccer saying, "Hey, that's ours." No,
Now,
it's not.
I know it wouldn't go with the StreamYard and things, but we could log on and go live on TikTok, join up, and do it on TikTok.
Well, the only way we can go live on TikTok is how I'm doing it this way. And with this, I can only stay on for 4 hours at a time.
Okay. I don't know. We'll talk about it more, and we still got a little time
Yeah,
See
we got 2 weeks.
to come up with.
We
We still
got-
doing a show on, is it the 18th or 25th?
Well, we have another show on the 18th to do this,
Okay.
that Wednesday night. Then the 25th, as far as I know, we're not doing one because that's when you're working.
I'm actually off that night.
Really?
Yeah.
You're off 2 Wednesdays in a row?
Yeah. Every third Wednesday I would work.
Oh, yeah, because you're on 3-day cycles.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I work the first.
Okay. So 2 Wednesdays you can do it, and then the third Wednesday you can't.
Right.
Okay.
So we could
It's
go.
not-
We could go 2, skip 1, go 2, skip 1, if you wanted to do that.
I have no problem with that unless I get somebody that wants to be on the show. And I've already had a couple of people ask about being on the show.
On the wrestling show?
Yeah.
That sounds
They
good.
want to be a guest.
Okay.
And I got a couple of people that I would like to ask to get on the show as well at some point.
Let's talk about that, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
You're talking about wrestlers?
No, some friends on Facebook that want to be on the show
Okay.
because they want to talk about it. It'd be nice if we could get some of the wrestlers on the show.
I'll see what I can do on my end and see if we can't
Yeah.
pull some guy, maybe some older guys, but
Oh yeah, because they're the ones that got the best stories.
yeah.
All right.
I'll hit up a couple on my Facebook page and see if I can get anybody interested.
That'd be cool. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. So, for those of you who have tuned in, I want to thank you for playing along. Hope we didn't bore you too much. But, like I said, this is something different for the network. Yes, we are paranormal investigators, but everybody has something that they enjoy that's not paranormal. For us, it's wrestling. So, but we'll be back here on Wednesday night at the same time. Only this time we're going to only be an hour because there'll be another show behind us. Tonight we had a little bit of a leeway. So, well, I guess until Wednesday night.
Till the 18th. Yep.
All right. Well, until then, everybody out there, have a good night and have a good weekend.
You have a good night. Thank y'all for joining us.